As you can see, I think I'll start a new chapter today, Newton's laws of motion. Google Classroom, I have already created the topic, Newton's laws of motion. And in that topic, I have added this Jamboard link. Okay. Just now I have added the Jamboard link on Google Classroom. Kindly get it there. We'll start the class in 5 minutes. Anirudh, yesterday there was no class at all, pa. Yesterday it was Janmashtami or something, no? Yesterday there was no class at all, Anirudh. Day before yesterday, I don't know what happened, like some issue in scheduling. Instead of 4 classes, there were only 2 classes. So that is the update I have. Krishna Jayanti, Janmashtami, Krishna Jayanti, both are same only. Sideshwar asks, is there any pass mark for the upcoming 50-mark test by seekers? In any subjective test, try to assume that 40% is the pass mark. And we are not looking for 40% in any exam. Okay. Try to get to 60% at least. The paper would be very easy. In all your subjective exams, the only thing that you have to read, the only thing that you have to study and come to the exam is your textbook and notebook. That is all, nothing else. For all your subjective exams, you have to refer to your notebook and textbook. That is all, nothing else. That is how it will be. 60% is what is expected. Okay. Subjective tests will be easier, relatively speaking. So Sideshwar, I would say 30 marks you should be able to score out of 50, 25 to 30 at least. Okay. Am I audible enough? I think I am under the weather. So I'm just confirming. Am I audible? Great, thanks. Okay, so some of you have already joined on the Jamboard. I see that. And more students are just coming in. Swati, I think most students are trying at the same time, simultaneously. Maybe that is why you are not able to join the Jamboard. But do not worry. I just gave the link, not for looking at it right now. You can look at it later. After the class, if you want to look at the board, you can use that link. Okay, so there's no emergency here. Right. Okay, let me share the Jamboard link on the chat also. There. Siddharth, got it? Siddharth, the one who asked in the next week's physics test, do we have to upload the document on Learnity? Honestly, I have no idea about how this subjective test will happen. Please talk to your teacher and look at all the SMSs that you are getting. Check all your messages. Look at Learnity for any update or something on that. Okay, so the announcement will be done to you like that only. I will also try to inquire. If I get any news about it, I'll share it with you tomorrow. But currently, I don't have any idea how this test will take place. Paul Morgan, I am speaking. In the middle, I did not speak for a lot of time. I mean, we were waiting for others to join, actually. Okay, currently the Jamboard is apparently full, so don't worry about getting into Jamboard right now. It only allows a few people at a time. Yeah, good evening, Narayanan. Okay, so maybe we'll start the class now. Let us start the class now. Good afternoon to you all. I'm closing the chat now. We'll start the class. Okay, regarding Newton's laws of motion. This is a new chapter. Newton's laws of motion. Like almost like, in the early part of 16th or 17th century, this is Sir Isaac Newton had actually, laid out a theory regarding gravitation, optics, etc. He wrote a book called Principia Mathematica. In that book, he gave some theory regarding the laws of nature that govern motion of particles. Okay. We have a word in physics called mechanics. Mechanics is a branch of physics that deals with factors that control motion. Mechanics deals with the factors that control motion. It's like in kinematics, we worried about motion parameters and relations between them. We never asked a question, why is this motion happening? What is making it happen? What is accelerating? What is responsible for acceleration of a vehicle or something? Those questions we never asked in kinematics chapter. Mechanics chapter basically tries to answer those questions. It talks about the factors that control the motion. Okay. So as far as mechanics is concerned, there are two sub-branches. One, you can call it as classical mechanics, which is otherwise called as Newtonian mechanics. So that's where it started. The other one is called quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is obviously much advanced as in developed much later, mostly in the early part of 20th century. With the help of Einstein, Planck, etc. We will not talk about that right now. Newtonian mechanics talks about factors controlling the motion of macroscopic objects, daily life objects, right? Pen, table, train, aeroplane, etc. Quantum mechanics talks about very quick and fast motion of very tiny particles. Basically, this deals with speeds comparable to that of light of particles which are also light, if you can understand that. This is what is the form of energy, and this is basically an adjective, not very heavy. Okay? So quantum mechanics deals with factors controlling motion of very fast moving tiny particles. Okay. Classical mechanics is otherwise. Newtonian mechanics is usual. Yeah. So in your chemistry, you have learned about atomic structure, etc. In that chapter, you have come across photoelectric effect and all such things, photons, motion of photons, that motion of photons, motion of electrons, the way photons and electrons interact with each other during collisions, what happens, all such things you will learn under quantum mechanics concept. There, some of the formulae that we will learn in classical mechanics may not hold up. Okay, may not hold up. See, basically, to tell you the basic difference between these two branches. Newtonian mechanics basically assumes that there is no loss or gain of mass during a process, whereas quantum mechanics understands the conversion of mass to energy and acknowledges it also, of course. It takes it into account. When if there is a mass, if there is a loss of mass, it also takes it into account and then say how it can be accounted for gain of some energy somewhere. Say in a chemical reaction, in chemistry you should have studied this, in a chemical reaction, the total mass of the reactants must always be equal to total mass of the products. Any reaction must obey the law of conservation of mass. Is it not? That is how you have learned in chemistry. But in a nuclear reaction, which is actually a physical one, not a chemical reaction, in a nuclear reaction, there is an actual loss of mass. The total mass of the reactants is actually slightly more than the total mass of the products. So during the reaction, actually some of the mass gets lost, gets destroyed, which kind of violates the law of conservation of mass, is it not? Law of conservation of mass basically says that the mass cannot be created nor be destroyed. But in a nuclear reaction, there seems to be a permanent loss of mass. There seems to be a destruction of mass. And there also seems to be a very large energy created out of nowhere. That again seems to violate the law of conservation of energy. So in a single reaction, there seems to be a violation of two laws, two basic laws of nature. Law of conservation of mass and law of conservation of energy. Einstein suggested, okay, so do not think that this reaction is violating two different laws. Rather think or rather perceive it as it is unifying two laws into a single law. Okay, that is where he gave the formula E is equal to mc square, saying mass and energy are not two different things. Maybe they are quite just the different forms of each other. Mass and energy are equivalent to each other. This reaction or this equation is basically called mass energy equivalence relation. Same amount of mass is equivalent to m into c square amount of energy. Okay, c is the speed of light in vacuum, 3 into 10 power 8 meter per second. This equation is called mass energy equivalence relation. So in a nuclear reaction, there is no destruction of mass, annihilation. There is no creation of energy. You can basically say that the mass got converted into energy. Okay, so law of conservation of mass and law of conservation of energy are not necessarily two different laws, is what is understood in quantum mechanics. In classical mechanics, we don't come across such situations. Law of conservation of mass is separate and law of conservation of energy is separate, and both are obeyed in every possible case according to classical mechanics. That is the only difference. So you could say that quantum mechanics actually is much advanced version of classical mechanics, works in all cases. Yeah. Okay, so that is basically some history. I would rather have you guys go to Wikipedia and search on mechanics and see the history and timeline of the development of this topic, right? Who worked on it first and what started it all. Maybe it's all some one particular question that would have started all these things, right? So maybe go search on it. You are probably free only these days, so search on the internet about the history of mechanics. It's actually a nice thing to do before learning a chapter. Anyway, let us get into the chapter. Okay, so we'll start with the Newton's laws of motion directly. There are three laws of motion that the Newton stated. Three laws of motion. The first one is called law of inertia. The first one is called law of inertia. It states that every object tends to be in a state of rest or uniform motion unless it is acted upon by a net external force. We shall talk more about this first law in a short time, okay? Every object tends to be in a state of rest or uniform motion unless it is acted upon by a net external force. We'll talk more about it later. Give me a little time. We'll basically give the statements of all three laws and then we'll try to write the significance of all of them, each of them. Okay. The second law states like this. The rate of change of momentum. The rate of change of momentum of an object is directly proportional to the net external force acting on the object. That is a statement of the second law of motion. The rate of change of momentum of an object is directly proportional to the net external force acting on it. Third law is what you all know, action-reaction law. For every action, there exists an equal and opposite reaction. These are the three laws of motion. Get to know the statements properly. Okay, definitions and these laws, these statements, they are much more important than whatever you study in a chapter. These things basically construct the whole chapter together. So try to understand and learn these statements as it is, as much as possible. Okay, these are not exact statements that are there in the textbook or any other book. I am making these statements up, of course, based on what I have understood about these theories. You can also write these statements in your own words. Nothing wrong, but don't write wrong statements. That's all. Okay, you can write a theory in your own words. Don't write own theories. Okay, so try to understand what is the theory and present it in your own words. No issues at all. The first law of motion is basically called law of inertia. It says that every object tends to be in a state of rest or uniform motion unless or until it is acted upon by a net external force. Every word in the statement is very important. Even if you leave one word, that statement kind of falls apart. I'll tell you why later. Okay. The second law of motion states that the rate of change of momentum is directly proportional to the net external force acting on the object. The third statement is that forces always occur in pairs. They never occur alone. Meaning for every action and reaction, both are forces only. If there is a force, there is another force. It means for every action, there exists an equal and opposite reaction. Okay, we will try to develop on these statements now. Okay, is there any doubt regarding the statements currently? Nikhil? Of an object might be constant, but mass of a system might be varying. So we will talk about that later. Nikhil Krishna, don't worry. Yes. Very well. Sir, is it the second law and third law correlated? All three laws are correlated very well. In fact, the second law of motion is the most significant of all. The second law of motion is the most significant of all three laws. If you state the second law, it is as good as stating all three laws. That is how significant it is. It covers for first law as well as third law. The second law is kind of the most significant of all three. It was even a question asked in one of the entrance exams. How will we derive E equal to mc square? We don't. For now, just learn it. We don't derive it now. This is not even that chapter. Focus on what is at our hand right now. Okay. But there is no net loss of mass, as the lost mass is the form of slow neutrons and their energy was there from the first answer. Yeah. Kind of same one. Yeah. So understood now, so these statements cannot go out of your heads for at least a couple of years. I mean, you will never be able to forget after it. Just telling. So there were some people, like I told you, if you go in search of that history and timeline of mechanics, you will come across these names. You will come across a name called Aristotle. You will come across a name called Galileo. All great people. Okay, Aristotle was more of a philosopher than a scientist, but of course his thoughts were based on some basic experiments only, observations and experiments. Okay, Aristotle stated that the natural state of motion of an object, we have studied about states of motion in the previous chapter. Several states of motion we had studied. State of rest, state of uniform motion, state of uniformly accelerated motion, circular motion, uniform circular motion, simple harmonic motion is some chapter that we will come across later. So these are all several states of motion that an object can be in. Okay, Aristotle stated that natural state of motion of an object is rest. If you leave an object, naturally it can only stay at rest, is what his statement is. Okay? Basically, what it means is to move an object, you would have to force it. That is what his observation is. To move an object, we would have to force it. Force is a specific term here. We would have to cause an external influence. Okay, we would have to cause an external influence like a pull or a push. Only then we would be able to move a stationary object. Say there is a football on the ground, just lying stationary on the ground. If you have to move it, you have to kick it, right? You have to pick it up or you have to kick it or something like that. So unless we give the external influence on the object is not going to start moving on its own. Which means he says, Aristotle's theory, this is, Aristotle stated that motion is always forced. Okay, that is the idea that was laid down by Aristotle. Motion is always forced. In fact, he supported this statement, like somebody would have asked him, like, try to explain this. He supported this statement by explaining the motion of an arrow. When you throw an arrow, throw as in using a bow, when you project an arrow, it basically pierces any medium that goes into, right? That it, whatever, if it is moving into air, it basically pierces that air to move away. When the arrow keeps moving, piercing the air in front of it, it is displacing a lot of volume of air from that region, which means right behind that arrow, there is a void created. What is a void? A void is basically empty space, like vacuum. Void is nothing but empty space, or is also called as vacuum. As the arrow keeps moving within the air, it is displacing a lot of air. It is making the air move away from the air position, right? Which means behind the arrow, there is a void created. Void means an empty space or a vacuum. But we have studied, but we have understood already that air always moves from higher pressure to lower pressure regions. Vacuum means no pressure. Only if there is matter, there can be pressure, right? So vacuum means no pressure, which means this displaced air would have to move behind this arrow. And this push, right? This push is what keeps the arrow in its motion. Okay, so somebody might have asked him, sir, if you project an arrow from the bow, the arrow keeps going. It is in motion. What force is there on the arrow? What force is causing the arrow to continuously move it? So Aristotle explained like this. There is a mistake in this situation. I'll tell you later. Don't think this is a correct theory. This is the explanation of Aristotle to support his statement that motion of an object is always under some influence called as force. Okay. So the idea, the understanding that he gave to say that there is always a force on the arrow to keep it in its motion, this is the idea he gave. This is a theory he gave. Understood or not? I tell you this. I try to explain Aristotle's theory based on what you have seen. See, he would have seen arrows all his day, in his days, right? Very naturally. I will tell you an explanation that maybe will be relevant to you guys. Say you have your cycle. You have your bicycle, right? Unless you pedal your bicycle, the bicycle is never going to stop. I mean, bicycle is not going to continuously move. The bicycle is already in motion. The bicycle is already in motion in the forward direction. If you stop pedaling the bicycle, it is quite probable that the bicycle will come to a halt. The bicycle will stop moving after some time. So to keep the bicycle in motion continuously, you would have to continuously pedal it. You would have to continuously create an influence on it, external influence, is it not? Which means there must be a force to continue or to perform the motion. Force is always needed for an object to be moving. That's how we might understand it. Am I right or not? That is understanding of Aristotle also. However, see, this he told almost 200 years before Christ, BC, 200 BC. Galileo came into picture in the 17th century. Oh, yeah, yeah, that only. Galileo came into picture in the 17th century. That's almost like 600 AD. During that time, imagine how many years is that? From here to here, there are 1800 years. For almost those many years, people had been thinking like this only. People had been thinking that there is only one natural state of motion. Only one natural state of motion. An object can be naturally at rest only. Every other motion is a forced state of motion. Okay, only one natural state of motion, and that is nothing but rest. This was the understanding for almost 1800 years. So imagine the difficulty that Galileo had to face to change people's minds about this theory. How many experiments he must have, how many experiments he must have performed and all that. He performed a very simple experiment. I think this experiment you had studied in 8th standard or 9th standard. If you are CBSE students before 10th class, in 8th or 9th class, you have this experiment in your syllabus, in your textbook. Galileo's experiments on inclined planes, it is called. This experiment is called Galileo's experiment on inclined planes. Have you come across this before? Yeah, definitely good. So in 9th standard, you had come across this. This is there actually in your book, textbook. Okay. So let us say, okay, I'm not going to go into the details of the experiment, but let us try to understand the experiment on our own terms. Okay. So let us say the surfaces are all, let us say, very smooth, so that the friction is out of picture. Surfaces are all smooth. The inclined plane on this side has a certain angle of inclination. The inclined plane on this side has a certain different, or maybe whatever, some other angle of inclination. What is an inclined plane? First of all, an inclined plane is basically a wedge or a plane surface, flat surface that is not horizontal. Plane surface at an angle to the horizontal. This is what is called as an inclined plane, like a ramp. In hospitals, you will see these ramps. In front of a bike showroom, when you're loading or unloading the bike from a truck, you will see these ramps, right? So those are all inclined planes, I told. So yeah, we have an understanding. In nature, whenever you leave a system or an object to act on its own, it will always perform something. It will always do something in such a way that it will lose energy. So you know that this energy is called potential energy. There is some form of energy called potential energy. You had studied that in your earlier classes. So I'm taking some advantage here. Even though work power energy is the next chapter, I am taking some advantage here because you already know this. Objects do have potential energy by virtue of their altitude, how high they are above the ground. Based on that, objects possess potential energy. When you leave an object from a certain height, it always tries to fall down. Why does an object fall down when you leave it? There are two ways in which you can answer that question. One, using forces you can answer. Because it is under the influence of external force called gravity, it gets pulled downwards. That's why it falls downwards. Fair enough. That is one way of explaining it. Another explanation is using energy. A system always tends to be stable, and a system becomes stable by losing energy. A system becomes stable by losing energy. The energy possessed by that object when you put it at a height, when you leave it at a height above the ground, it possesses a kind of energy called as potential energy. And the system or the object wants to lose that energy. Why does it want to lose that energy? That is the nature of any system in universe. That is the nature of any system in the universe. Try to remember it as a rule of thumb. Understood? If you are given energy, what will you do? If I give you a lot of energy, what will you do? Will you like to have energy or not like to have energy? Nobody likes energy. No system, no object, nobody likes energy in the universe. If I give you energy, what will you do? You will immediately spend it. You will go play around, you will hump, you will jump around, you will hop around, you will do all those things, you will play, you will basically spend that energy and sit around stably. That's what you do, right? Everybody does that only. Nobody wants energy. Nobody is going to sit down with a lot of energy. Understood or not? So this object, because it has potential energy, wants to lose it immediately. It wants to become stable, so it has to lose that energy. How does an object lose potential energy? Potential energy is by virtue of height. So it loses height, it comes down, it falls down. As the object falls down, it keeps losing potential energy. However, an object will actually lose energy if there is another object which can grab it. If there is another object which can take that energy away, or if it is doing work. Okay, if it is having to spend some energy to trying to overcome another forces, other resisting forces, then energy is lost, truly. But in this case, air resistance is not there, meaning when the object is coming down, it is not trying hard to come down. Okay, and there is no other object which can take away that energy, which means its energy is not truly lost. So even though it is losing height, it is only losing potential energy. However, its energy as such is not getting lost, meaning its energy is converting from one form, which is potential, to probably another form of mechanical energy, which is called as kinetic energy. So as the object keeps falling down, its potential energy keeps getting converted into kinetic energy. That is the idea we have. Now with that idea, let us try to understand what happens on this experiment. Okay, on the inclined plane, assuming all surfaces are smooth, meaning friction is ruled out, resisting forces are not there. Like in the above situation, in this situation, like we assumed that there is no air resistance, here we are assuming that there is no friction. That's all. Okay. If I leave the object from, say, for example, a height h on the left inclined plane, what will it do? Because of that height h, it is said to possess a potential energy. The object wants to lose that energy. For that, it has to lose that height. So it will start coming down. The object starts moving down the incline. As it keeps moving down the incline, its potential energy gets converted into kinetic energy. Why does it get converted into kinetic energy? Why can't the potential energy be lost completely? Because this object is not trying to overcome a resisting force. There is no friction. One. Similarly, there is no another system. There is no another mechanism where the lost energy is being used for something else. When this energy is being, see, for example, in a hydroelectric power plant, when the water falls down onto the turbines, that energy lost by the water is converted into electrical energy. Correct or not? There is no mechanism like that here. So that potential energy is not completely lost. It is just being converted from that form to some other form. In this case, kinetic energy. So when the object reaches the bottom of the inclined plane, when the object reaches the bottom of the inclined plane, it has lost all its potential energy, which has gotten completely converted into kinetic energy now. If the energy it had at the top was E, the energy it has at the bottom is also E. But at the top, this energy was in the form potential. At the bottom, this energy is in the form of kinetic form. Understood? Which means overall, whatever happened here, the object still has not lost any energy overall. It tried to lose energy, but it could not. As it came down, it only was able to convert its potential energy to kinetic energy. The object cannot stay there forever because it has energy. It has to lose that kinetic energy. Right? When it was here, it had potential energy. To lose potential energy, it came down, but it could not lose the energy as such. It only converted that potential energy to kinetic energy. At this position, it has kinetic energy, which still has energy, no? So it wants to lose it. For that, the only thing it can do now is go up and try to convert that into potential energy because there is no other way for losing kinetic energy. So it goes up the incline to convert kinetic energy back to potential energy. But however, it does not go back. See, this is a two-sided inclined plane. There is a left inclined plane also. It only goes in the forward direction. it does not change its direction of motion on its own. Galileo observed that basically. It's basic enough. See, there is no question why. Why does the object not go back on its own? It just does not. That is the observation that we are taking from the experiment. It is the law of nature that any object cannot change its direction of motion on its own. Okay? If I had put a wall here, and then maybe when the ball hits the wall and goes back, maybe that's a possibility. But that is where there is an external influence given by the wall on the ball. Correct or not? So unless there is an external influence, naturally speaking, no object can change the direction of its motion on its own or by its own. So it continues moving in the same direction only. So in this particular direction, it will continue to move up the right inclined plane until it reaches what height? Until it reaches the height h. Why? Because whatever energy it had here, E amount of energy potential got converted into E amount of energy kinetic at this point. Now when it goes up this inclined plane, it still has the same amount of energy only, which means it will try to attain the same height. It will try to attain the same height. Don't think that, okay, on left side inclined plane, it has moved this distance. So on the right side inclined plane also, it will try to move the same distance. No, there is no rule like that. It is about energies here, not about distances. It is about energy. It has to attain the same height. Okay. Now, if, say, for example, on the right side, if I decrease the angle of inclination, say, for example, I make the inclined plane like this on right side, then the object would even can travel a larger distance to attain the same height again. To attain the same height again, it will even not mind traveling the larger distance. To move this distance, whatever change of energy was needed, to move this distance also, same amount of energy change was needed. Because it is going to end up with the same amount of energy here also, in the form of potential energy. Here also it was going to have the same amount of energy, potential form. Because that potential energy is by virtue of height. It does not matter what angle of inclination is. In fact, I can even do this. I can even try to take it further. It will still try to attain the same height, even going further on the inclined plane. So if I keep decreasing the angle of inclination on the right side of inclined plane, on the right inclined plane, the object would move even a larger distance to attain the same height as before on the left inclined plane. Ultimately, if I make the right inclined plane horizontal, if I make the right inclined plane horizontal, what do you think will happen? Tell me on the chat. On the right inclined plane, if I make it horizontal completely, what do you think will happen as far as the object is concerned? What will the object do now? It will continue to move forever. It wants to attain that height again. It has to attain that height again, until which it will continuously move. But because the inclined plane is now horizontal, it can never attain that height, which means it will move forever. Is it moving under any influence? Is it moving under any influence, or is it moving on its own? Is the object moving on its own or influenced? Moving on its own, correct. So that is how Galileo was able to explain that not only state of rest is natural for an object, state of motion is also natural. You don't have to force an object to continue its motion. Okay, so basically with that experiment, Galileo was able to show that natural states of motion for any object are not just one, or actually two. Rest is a natural state. Uniform motion is also a natural state. Uniform motion is also a natural state. Meaning, what does it mean? What is natural state? What does it mean by natural state? If an object is at rest, unless you force it, it will continue to be at rest. If an object is moving in a particular direction with a particular speed, unless you force it, it will continue to be moving in the same direction with the same speed. Same direction with the same speed, now meaning what? Same velocity. See, I cannot answer your doubts right now. So don't spam the chat right now. Okay, I cannot do that right now. Okay, so natural states of motion are two. Aristotle said only rest is the natural state of motion. Galileo was able to demonstrate that state of rest as well as state of uniform motion are both natural states of motion for an object. These two states, Nilaigal, these two states are collectively called as state of equilibrium. These two states are collectively called as state of equilibrium. Equilibrium is a state, it's not a location, it's a state. Okay, state of rest or uniform motion is called state of equilibrium. So tell me yes or no on the chat. If an object is at rest, it is in equilibrium. Yes or no? If an object is at rest, it is in equilibrium. Yes or no? Yes, very good. Next question. Okay, stop answering now. Stop answering now. Yeah. Next question. If an object is in uniform motion, it is in equilibrium. Yes or no? Right. There is one no here. Yapet. Wrong answer. If an object is in uniform motion, then also it is said to be in equilibrium state. Correct only. Okay. Okay, stop answering now. Okay, stop answering. Just wait. If an object is in a state of equilibrium, if an object is in a state of equilibrium, does it mean it is at rest? If an object is in equilibrium, does it mean it is at rest? Very good. If an object is in equilibrium, it does not necessarily mean that it is at state of rest. It is stationary. It could have been stationary or it could be moving uniformly, meaning with a constant velocity. Understood or not? So try to understand what is implied in all that. Rest implies equilibrium. Uniform motion implies equilibrium. Okay, equilibrium does not necessarily imply rest or uniform motion, could be either. Okay, could be either. Are you able to understand this? If an object is in equilibrium, it means it is either at rest or in uniform motion also. Could be both. So don't assume equilibrium always means rest. That was the work of Galileo. Thanks to Galileo, Newton was able to develop his theory. I told you about that book that Newton wrote, something called Principia Mathematica. Search on that. One of the most important books ever written in physics, in science basically. Principia Mathematica. Newton is a mathematician, not a scientist. I mean, he's more of a mathematician than a scientist. Principia Mathematica, this is what. Actually, there's a full name for it. The English translation, I think, is Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. I think that is a total full title of that book. The Italian version is having that kind of a name, Principia Mathematica. Okay, in that book, the first thing he wrote was he was able to stand on the shoulders of a couple of giants, the two giants being Kepler and Galileo. He was able to stand on the shoulders of those two giants and was able to see far beyond what they could see. That was the tribute he gave to Galileo and Kepler, because the main theories that he laid out in that book were gravitation, laws of gravitation and laws of motion. Those are the two main theories in that book written. Okay, so Kepler helped him with gravitation, helped him assist what? Indirectly. Kepler's theory helped Newton with law of gravitation. Galileo's concepts, Galileo's theory helped Newton with the concepts of laws of motion. Pranav, I have not even seen one page of the book. Okay, yeah, I did not read the book. Yeah, I did not. But I know that there is a small portion of the book where Newton tries to prove why 1 is not equal to 2. Okay, In that book, Principia Mathematica, apparently Newton tried to prove that 1 is not equal to 2, because I think it is very important to show that 1 is not equal to 2, because if 1 is equal to 2, then I mean the whole number system fails. Basically, see, if I say let A equal to B, let multiplying B on both sides, so AB equal to B square, subtracting A square from both sides, AB minus A square equal to B square minus A square, factorizing on both sides, A into B minus A is equal to B plus A into B minus A. B minus A cancel. So I have A is equal to B plus A. Because A equal to B, I can say A is equal to 2A. Cancelling out A and A, I can get 1 equal to 2. Now this seems to be a very strong proof to show 1 is equal to 2. But that's obviously wrong. It's obviously stupid. There is a clear mistake somewhere in this. There is surely a mistake in this process. No, I was just able to prove that 1 equal to 2. If someone comes up with a method like this to show 1 is equal to 2, then the whole number system fails, because if 1 is equal to 2, then adding 1 on both sides, 2 is equal to 3. If 1 is equal to 2 and 2 equal to 3, then 1 is equal to 3, which means there is no distinction between any number at all. Okay, so there is a clear mistake here. I'll tell you the mistake. The mistake is cancelling this B minus A. Why? Because we started with an assumption that A is equal to B. We started with an assumption that A is equal to B. Then B minus A becomes 0, no? You cannot cancel zeros. You cannot cancel zeros. That is a mistake in that proof anyway. So this is where it goes wrong. Okay. So anyway, that is why I think Newton had thought that it was important to prove that 1 is not equal to 2 to save our number system. Anyway, that book is interesting that way. Let us go back to the chapter, Newton's laws of motion. So understand, equilibrium is a state in which an object can be. When you say an object is in equilibrium, it could have been either at rest or it could have been in uniform motion. In time mechanics chapter, we saw that rest means velocity is equal to 0, acceleration is equal to 0. Of course, in a time interval, prolonged rest. In a time interval, if an object is at rest, not momentary, not instantaneous. In a time interval, if an object is at rest, it means its velocity is 0, acceleration is 0. Uniform motion basically means velocity is constant, some constant value, and acceleration is equal to 0. Now, can you say what is common for both rest and uniform motion? What is common for both state of rest and state of uniform motion? Don't say A. A is equal to 0. A is equal to 0 is common for state of rest and uniform motion. So what does it mean? It basically defines equilibrium. Equilibrium. This is actually mechanical equilibrium. We don't say it every time, but basically this equilibrium means mechanical equilibrium. We will come across other types of equilibria. In thermal physics, we will come across thermal equilibrium, temperatures equal. In electricity, we will come across electrical equilibrium, potentials becoming equal, like that. Anyway, there is also chemical equilibrium, right, in chemistry, like that. This equilibrium is called mechanical equilibrium. You could say equilibrium is a state of no acceleration. Equilibrium is a state of no acceleration. Now, does that make sense or not? If an object is at rest or it is in uniform motion, we say it is in a state of equilibrium. Basically means equilibrium is nothing but a state of no acceleration. If you try to go back to the statement of first law of motion, every object tends to be in a state of rest or uniform motion. This state of rest or uniform motion is what? State of rest or uniform motion is nothing but state of equilibrium, and that is only possible under, this can only be changed. The state of rest or state of uniform motion of an object can only be disturbed by a net external force. So what is the purpose of a force? The force is there to disturb equilibrium. So what is the purpose of a force? Purpose of a force is to cause acceleration. That is the basic idea laid out by Newton's law of motion. First law of motion. Understood or not? The purpose of any force is to cause acceleration. But will a force be able to cause acceleration or not? That depends on whether other forces are also there on the object. Okay, I have my weight acting on me. You know that the earth is pulling you down, but we are not moving downwards because there are other forces on us which are balancing the pull of the earth on us. Okay, so whether the object has acceleration or not is determined by not just one or two forces on the object. It is determined the net force. It is determined by the net force, the total resultant of all forces acting on the object. That forms a very important part of this chapter. This chapter basically deals you in finding or in locating or identifying all the forces acting on an object and trying to understand what is the net force, what is the resultant force, and see what acceleration is acquired by the object because of those forces. That is the main part of this chapter. Okay. Siddheshwar asks, sir, would every object tend to be in an equilibrium? Tend to be in equilibrium? Yes, very good. Every object tends to be in equilibrium. That's a good point, actually. I told you, natural state of motion. The natural state of motion is rest or uniform motion. The objects, every object tends to be stable. Tends to be stable or non-reactive. In chemistry, can you think of any word that means non-reactive? In chemistry, can you think of any word that means non-reactive? Inert, very good. Not neutral, not noble. Those are not exactly this meaning. Non-reactive necessarily means inert, not doing anything. Every object tends to be inert. Every object tends to be inert. Tendency. Tendency means tanmay. Okay, so understand, equilibrium is different. Equilibrium is a state. Inertia is a tendency of an object. That is where you are getting that word, inertia. Inertia means what? Inertia means tendency of an object to stay inert. To stay inert. Instead of saying inert, I'll say to stay in the state of equilibrium. State of equilibrium. The tendency of an object to stay in the state of equilibrium is what is called as inertia. What is the purpose of a force? In other words, purpose of a force on an object is to overcome its inertia. To overcome its inertia. And that can only take place by an external influence, not an internal influence. Only an external force can cause an object to overcome its own inertia. We will talk more about inertia in a short while. Do we understand this? Sir, but when you throw something vertically, G acts on it even when that something comes to the rest, right? Yeah, I'm telling you very well, that's what. Whether a force is there on the object or, when there is a force on the object, there is a tendency for acceleration to that object. Now, whether there is an acceleration or not, that depends on the presence of other forces. Okay, when you throw an object upwards, as it is moving in air, assuming there is no air resistance, okay, as the object is moving in air, the only influence that is there on the object is gravity, and therefore it will have acceleration due to gravity, unbalanced force. But when the object falls to the ground and stays on the ground it is not only acted upon by the gravity downwards, the object also experiences an upward contact force from the ground on which it is staying at rest. So these two forces combined, apparently zero, they become a set of balanced forces, and that is why there is no acceleration now. So don't think gravity is not trying. Gravity is trying to give acceleration, but there is other force also which is trying to give acceleration in the opposite direction. Okay, rest means equilibrium, simple. You cannot say rest isn't merely equilibrium. No, that is a wrong concept. If an object is at rest, it means it is in equilibrium. Okay. If an object is at rest, it is in equilibrium. Very well, understood or not? If the object that you have thrown upwards, when it comes to rest at the top, at the ground, it is in equilibrium. Or maybe very well, you are talking about rest at the topmost point. If you are talking about the rest at topmost point, it make it clear here. We are talking about prolonged rest, not momentary rest. I told you. Very well. I am talking about prolonged rest, not coming to a rest at an instant or for a moment. I'm not talking about that. In an interval of time, if an object is at rest, then you say it is in equilibrium. At a particular point, if an object comes to rest, that is not called equilibrium. Got it? No? Oh, very good. Okay. So the purpose of a force is basically to overcome its inertia. Okay. If you have an object at rest on the ground, as much time as long as you look at it, it does not move. You have to cause an external influence on it. A wind has to blow to make a tree sway around. The wind has to blow for the flag to flutter. You would have to pedal. See now, can we try to explain the concept of pedaling the bicycle? What keeps the bicycle in its motion? You are pedaling it. Are you pedaling it to see? It seems that you are pedaling it to keep it in its motion. So, was the force required to keep the object in motion? That was not the concept. What Aristotle missed in his concept of arrow, what Aristotle missed here, he told that the air goes back into this void and tries to push the arrow forward. That is all correct, no problem. But however, at the front of the arrow, as the arrow tries to pierce the air, okay, there is a resistance on the arrow. Understood or not? There is a resistance on the arrow. So this force was not needed to keep the object in uniform motion. Uniform motion was not actually forced motion. What happened there? This push from backwards, it basically balanced out this push against the motion of the arrow. So this force exerted by the air on the arrow backwards added to the push by the air on the arrow in the forward direction. Those two forces got balanced, and that is why the arrow was able to perform uniform motion. So the uniform motion of the arrow was actually because of the lack of a net force, not because of there is a force. Not because there was a force, but because there was a balancing force. Same thing on the same thing. Same way you can explain the motion of a bicycle also. You are pedaling the bicycle not just to keep the bicycle in uniform motion. Your force is trying to balance an already existing force which is trying to oppose the motion of the bicycle. If you stop pedaling, the friction between the tires and the road slows down the vehicle, slows down the bicycle. Okay. When you pedal, you are giving additional force which balances the existing resisting force, and therefore the net force on the bicycle becomes zero, and that is why it is able to perform uniform motion. Uniform motion is not under the influence of a force. Uniform motion is under the influence of zero net force. Okay, it feels like you are giving force, but that force is actually making other forces together as zero. There was already some resistance, you are adding to that, and the total becomes zero. That is how you keep an object in uniform motion. Are we able to understand this or not? Okay, so you understand what is inertia. See, interestingly, inertia can be defined in several ways, in a lot of ways. Inertia can be defined like this. Like I already told you, tendency of an object to stay in a state of rest or uniform motion. That is called inertia. Another definition of inertia is ability of an object to resist the action of any force on it. Because the force has to overcome the inertia, I told you, right? So sometimes inertia is also defined as an ability of an object to resist the action of any force on it. Inertia can also be defined as an inability of an object. Inertia can also be defined as inability of an object to change its equilibrium on its own. Or you could say to change its state of motion, to change its state of motion on its own. There are these three ways in which you can define inertia. Inability of an object to overcome, inability of an object to accelerate by its own, inability of an object to change its state of motion on its own. Inertia can be defined in these three ways. You can define it as a tendency, you can define it as an ability, you can define it as an inability. Yeah. Understood or not? This inertia is of three types. This inertia is of three types. Inertia of rest, inertia of motion, inertia of direction. What is inertia of rest? The tendency of a stationary object to remain at rest unless there is an external influence on it is called as inertia of rest. Okay, already stationary object to continue being stationary. That tendency is called inertia of rest. Inertia of motion. Similarly, inertia of motion is defined as the tendency of an object, tendency of a moving object to continue moving with the same speed is called inertia of motion. Inertia of direction is defined as the tendency of a moving object to continue moving in the same direction unless it comes across a net external force, unless it is being influenced from outside. Then it is called inertia of direction, the tendency of that. Okay. If you are running fast and there is something that your legs catch up on, then you will trip over. Say, for example, you are running in an auditorium, you are running over. When you're running in an auditorium, if there are some wires lying around, you don't see them, then your legs get caught up in the wires and you fall down. You fall down to the front. You fall down on your nose. Why? Why does it happen? Because your body was in motion already, which means your body has the tendency to continue moving, but your legs got caught up suddenly. Okay, the information that your legs got that it has to stop cannot go to your complete body instantly. It has to be gradually transmitted, that force. Okay, because it happened so suddenly, the upper part of your body does not get that information. It tries to continue moving in the same direction. So your upper body moves forward, your legs got stuck at the same point, so you fall to the front. Okay, that's an example of inertia of motion. That's not the only example. You can think of several examples. Inertia of rest. What could be inertia of rest? I can give you a very simple example. You put a book on the table, you keep looking at it for a long time, it stays at rest. That is an example of inertia of rest. You don't have to think about textbook examples. You can think of your own examples. Inertia of rest. One very, very common experiment that you will see on YouTube is this. We have a tumbler on which you place a cardboard, on which you place a coin, let us say some coin. You pull the cardboard very fast or you strike the cardboard very suddenly, and then the coin falls into the tumbler instead of going away with the cardboard. Or in a restaurant, when they remove the tablecloth very fast, the utensils on the table stay as such. The tablecloth just comes out from between them. These are all examples of inertia of rest. Okay. In fact, they do laundry using inertia of rest. In your house also, when you want to dust a towel or a mat, you take it to the wall and beat it like hell. When you beat the towel, basically what you're doing, you're displacing the towel very fast. The dust particles or the water particles, they stay there and then they fall off because they lost contact. Okay, so these are all examples of inertia of rest. Inertia of direction we saw. In inclined plane, an object moving forward, that ball could not go back in the left side inclined plane. It had to move forward only. Inertia of direction. When you are in a car, the car suddenly takes a right turn. You tend to move in the same direction. So with respect to the car, it's like moving in the leftward direction. You seem to get pushed to the leftward direction. I don't know. So that's an example for inertia of direction. Of course, there are a lot of examples that we can give. Okay. So try to think some out of the box, out of the book examples. I would suggest you to go back home today. I mean, stay home today, and then maybe search online regarding this mechanics and try to understand the terms inertia. You can search for the same term, separate term. Search for inertia. Try to learn a little about it. Search for equilibrium. Try to learn a little about it. Theoretically only. Don't worry about problems. Just theoretically try to understand what is equilibrium, what is inertia, and all that. Very interesting concepts these are. Okay. I'll tell you what. If you understand mechanics properly, the way you look at the world changes. That much I can tell you. The way you perceive things around you changes drastically. Your your mind changes. The way you look at the way your perspective changes regarding the world, the dynamics of the world, at least the motion. Okay. So anyway, we'll meet tomorrow. We will continue on this. We have not even completed the first law. We have not even completed the explanation regarding first law yet. So tomorrow we will continue on that, and then we'll move on to second law. Swati, I am using a digital pen. Yes. I am using a laptop that has a stylus. Murugan, what doubt did you ask? Can you put it on WhatsApp? Roshan Vijay, why Galileo make physics difficult? No, Galileo made physics very easy. Newton made it even more easier. Otherwise, you would have to find all these things. Roshan, imagine that. Have you ever played a game, online game, Roshan Vijay? Online or offline, whatever. When you play a game and level up a lot, after getting to a lot of levels, it feels very awkward to go to the first level and start again. That is how awkward it would be for you now to start about atomic structure. If you have to discover atomic structure, imagine how hard it will be. Hmm. Swati, no, I am writing on the surface of the laptop monitor directly. It's a touchscreen laptop and I'm using a stylus. Okay. See, this one. That is what I'm using. Okay, fine. I leave now. I am ending the session for all. See you guys. Let us meet tomorrow. Bye. Confirm how to post test paper, sir. Yeah, I will confirm that. Siddharth, thank you for reminding. Exam portions, sir. What example? Oh, this weekend portions. This weekend portions could be motion in two dimension and maths. Maths as in calculus, vectors, etc. Kanish, why the word equilibrium is used? I'm not sure. Please, you search on equilibrium, you might get some idea. Why the word is used, I don't know, man. Something about Latin, Greek, something like that. Manish wants to talk about Schrodinger's cat experiment. That's a chemistry topic, Noda. Read on that, Manish. That is a good idea. Read on it, but that's not going to give you a lot of information right now. You may not understand a lot about that currently. Okay. Unable to join what, Ma Ashwati? Hmm. Ashwati, what are you not able to join? If it is about the Jamboard, try a little later. After people leave it, then you try, then you will be able to join. Oh, Kaushik. Yeah, do you. Okay, okay, fine. Because you did not have your name. Okay, then good. Thank you. So bye. See you. Let us meet tomorrow.